Hey guys, and welcome back to the Warwick F1 show. This is the 28th episode of the 2025 season, and we are coming to you with a podcast about the most breaking news coming from the world of Formula One, and that is the sacking, release, however you want to frame it, it's up to you. But the point is, Christian Horner is no longer the team principal of Red Bull Racing. This is a role that he's held since 2005. So this would have been his 20th year as team principal of one of the most dominant teams in recent history. Firstly, I want to kind of get everyone's thoughts on what this means for the sport, because before we go into the implications of it, I want to talk about what he's kind of done in his tenure, I guess, at Red Bull, because he was F1's youngest team principal at the age of 31 when he was appointed. How much of a big deal is this? What has he done in the last 20 years to warrant such fanfare when he leaves? Starting with you, Thomas, what's he done to the sport that has made it the way it is?
I mean, he's won championships, constructors championships, basically everything as a team principal. Staying in a team for 20 years is, you don't see that every day. So he's done a lot, and obviously kind of taking Red Bull from, it's kind of Jaguar days to where it is now. Can't help but, praise that, I guess.
100%. You can't knock the role that he's done in terms of the progression. Like you mentioned, he took charge of the previously known Jaguar team, a team that didn't have necessarily the pieces to become a world championship team in the short term. Yet he was able to do that by making them at least a contender by the time that 2009 came around. Lucy, to you, what's been the biggest thing that Horner brought, I guess, to the sport? What impact has he left?
Well, I think kind of obviously it's from him being in charge of Red Bull and Red Bull's performance as a team. Even when you consider, like, Red Bull was super dominant in the early 2010s and arguably could have won 2009 as well, were it not for Braun just deciding that they wanted to have a 100% championship win record for some reason. Even when they weren't as competitive, when Mercedes were really dominant, they were still up there as a team. They never faded into backmarker obscurity. They just weren't fighting for championships. And then obviously, with the period of dominance that we saw, which is now coming to an end, but we did see it, with Verstappen as the lead driver, like, Red Bull has been a consistent contender, maybe in part because they actually kept their team principal around instead of changing it every 5 minutes. He has been the leader of the team throughout lots of periods of success, and even in the periods of less success, those have felt temporary. So yeah, he's kept them as pretty consistent contenders, and on the whole, that's basically defined modern Formula One, because Red Bull are quite good at making good cars.
And what's also very important to not forget as well was he was the person who ultimately recruited Adrian Newey from McLaren, and Newey has only elevated his own position and his kind of reputation as a result of the success he has had at Red Bull. So he's undeniably had such a categorical impact in the sport. James, would we say he is one of the most successful team principals to have touched the sport? Was that a fair description, would you say?
Yes, definitely. I mean, stats speak for themselves. 8 drivers' championships, 6 constructors' championships, 2 periods of dominance. The fact he built up the team from really nothing, a completely new team, not even a car brand, and energy drinks company. I mean, people might have thought when Red Bull came in, it's not going to be a serious team. This is just some energy drinks company who really who just want a bit of publicity, like some of the other stranger entries which have entered F1 in the past, and that this won't be a serious front-running team yet. He's built up this team, being there right from the start of when Red Bull came in, all the way to winning lots of world championships, and built up this dominant force in F1 over 20 years. And yes, things have dropped off over the past year or so, but it's been so good over so long.
And the other thing the other thing as well, in terms of he's built up this team, he's also built up drivers too, the likes of Verstappen, the likes of Vettel. So many younger junior drivers who've gone to show success elsewhere, the likes of Sainz at Ferrari and now Williams. Ricciardo, when he was on form as well, was a driver to be feared. He's built up youthful drivers too. So he's him and I guess the team behind him have clearly done a lot more than just their own success. They've built up drivers to have very solid careers too. He's also received honours by virtue of the OBE that he was awarded in 2013 and the CBE awarded in 2024 for his services given to the sport of Formula One. Now, let's look at the actual news itself. Now, firstly, looking at the actual surprise of the news, because we've had rumours around his position and internal conflict at Red Bull for quite a while, dating back to the case that was kind of rocked that team in 2024. I guess my question starting with Thomas here is, how much of a surprise was this when we saw that news breaking, or was this actually a little bit okay? This was kind of written on the wall in some way.
It was a real surprise. I mean, okay, he has a few accusations going around, but to have someone like that who has been in the team since its very beginning to kind of be sacked halfway through a season, it's kind of, I don't think we've ever seen that before.
It's also the way that kind of it transpired as well, because like you mentioned, you don't really get more embedded into a team than being the first team principal to be there. If you look at the turnover of team principals from all of the other teams, barring Merck, I guess it's been pretty high turnover. We look at Ferrari in the early 2010s, a team with such history, yet they were turning over team principals like no tomorrow. So for them to have come to this decision mid-season is pretty wild. How about you, Lucy? Was there a surprise from your side when you saw this happen, or are you of the opinion that this was about to happen? Or what was your perspective of things?
I mean, I wasn't. I wouldn't say it was surprise. I didn't expect the announcement to come, mainly because, I mean, as tends to be the case in Formula One, you usually hear rumours about something for about, a week before it actually happens, at least. And there hadn't been any indication of him immediately going, to be honest, for about the last year, even maybe a little longer. Red Bull's kind of been falling apart. Like, they lost Newey, they lost Wheatley, they've lost a lot of people to various different teams. Even Perez, who is a pretty consistent second driver. All the rumours that Max might be going. I didn't expect it, but given the downturn in performance that Red Bull have had, and if there was conflict within the team already, like within upper management, I'm not surprised that the scenarios ended up with him going. I just didn't expect it. I expected he'd probably cling on to the end of the season, and then there'd be sort of a slightly more ceremonious sort of, oh, thank you for everything you've done for the team and things like that, instead of getting the full Red Bull treatment of being dropped mid-season.
Yeah, I mean, the whole dropping mid-season is also another thing to talk about. James, what do you think meant that Red Bull came to this decision? What do you think the lead up to this was? Do you think it was performance? Do you think it was the accusations around him? What do you think was the determining factor for them to make this decision at this point in time, rather than at the end of the season or the beginning?
Well, the timing's certainly a bit of a surprise. And we thought of the allegations, it would have happened when the allegations came out a year ago. I wouldn't have been surprised when we'd sat them. It's a bit of a surprise now. It came a bit out of the blue. I mean, the performance has been brilliant this year, but at the same time, it's not been dreadful. I mean, Verstappen still won 2 races. And even on Saturday, he took pole at Silverstone. Had it not rained, then he might have been in with a better chance of winning. So it's a bit of a surprise, the timing. Maybe something's happened behind the scenes we don't know about. There's talk that Red Bull are getting that since Dietrich Mateschitz died in 2022, their son and Red Bull hierarchy have tried to impose more control over the team and angry about how powerful Horner is, and there's a bit of a power struggle there. Or they want a team principal who would be less powerful than Horner. Maybe something suddenly happened behind the scenes, or maybe it's just a combination of everything coming together, and they've decided now's the time to get rid of him.
Let's explore this a little bit more, because let's look at the situation around Red Bull. It's very much they've lost Adrian Newey, like you mentioned, ever since Mateschitz passed away. That team has looked in significantly more disarray as more senior management and more people who are very close to the higher ups of Red Bull leave. We've seen Jonathan Wheatley make the move. We've seen many people from their aero team make moves as well. We had people like Dan. If we even going back to Dan Fowler, it shows that there's been a bit of an exodus at Red Bull, and that combined with the lack of success, do you think, Thomas, that is a recipe for instability at a team, even if at a team, regardless of their success?
Yeah. I mean, kind of, the more you offload staff, the more people get the sense of, okay, something's not right here. And if I go there, there's no kind of security, I guess. There's no stability. And I think with Horner's sacking, it just kind of gives off this vibe of desperation, in that they just want to get some kind of a quick fix or something done quickly to try and fix things.
Desperation is an interesting word. Lisa, would you say this is an act of desperation for Red Bull?
I don't know if it's desperation. I'd say it's almost an act of kind of it's not inevitability, but I'm going to use it because it feels the best. It's not that Red Bull have kind of tried everything else, and so we're going to try firing our team principal in the hopes that this works. It's more that Red Bull have kind of slowly basically having to deal with the reality that they're not as competitive as they once were, and that they've got so many people leaving that they feel that they have to try and do something to turn it around. And really, the thing about power struggle is that one half of the power struggle was always going to lose, and it's happened to be the side that Horner was on that's lost that power struggle, which means that all of the mess that is Red Bull has now kind of culminated in him. Because it's while kind of there's has he been released, has he been fired, he's not retired, he didn't leave of his own accord. Like things like the BBC were reporting that he got fired. So there's all the stuff behind the scenes. It's effectively their on-track performance has effectively become bad enough that it can't justify just kind of trying to deal with the mess that is Red Bull upper management. And so Red Bull are in a position where they kind of have to do something. And so this has happened to be the conclusion that it's come to.
I mean, the power struggle that you're mentioning in terms of Red Bull, the actual team, is to do with the balance between the Thai side of the business and the Austrian side of the business. Horner was backed by the Thais. He held close ties with them. Pun was not intended there, but he had close relations with the Thai side. And I think another factor to consider is the fact that the Thai shareholders they had I believe my understanding is that they transferred a 2% stake into a different fund or something along those lines, which then provided the Austrian side kind of influence rights in some way. So that probably is a factor involved in this, because this power struggle has been going on for quite a while. This probably meant the balance of power now lied with more of the Austrian side, which were the side that were ultimately wanting his sacking. So that probably is a backdrop to kind of consider whilst we discuss all of this. I want to move the discussion onto the actual race team now, because we've talked about how things can lead up to this point and what this kind of culminates in. But what do you think this means for the actual on-track performance of a team like Red Bull, Thomas? We'll start with James here, actually, because I want to hear his perspective on this. What do you think this means for Red Bull on the circuit? Let's say looking from Belgium onwards, what does this mean for them?
Well, in the short term, I don't think have a huge impact in the short term. I mean, his is more the general running of the team. I mean, it might affect things a bit operationally. Maybe we'll see the more decision on the strategy and the pit stops. But I'm not sure how much is that Horner personally. How hands-on he is with that kind of thing. That's probably more like people, I don't know, the sporting director and the race engineers and things. But certainly on things like a longer term in terms of designing the car, although again, it's not personally, but recruiting people and just the general marketing and just running of their team, hiring and firing people, and might cause problems in the long term for Red Bull as the leadership and the overall direction of the team. I mean, Laurent Mekies is doing a decent job at racing balls. He's going to be the Red Bull. We don't know how we'll do it as Red Bull team principal. And ultimately, what does it mean for the prospect of keeping Verstappen? Does it improve their chances if Verstappen falls out with Christian Horner and wants him gone? Does it increase the chance of keeping Verstappen?
Absolutely relevant discussions, because I think that's what this kind of does angle towards. Like you mentioned, Laurent Mekies is the one who's replacing Horner. We'll see how long that lasts and whether that's an interim position or not. We'll see how that plays out. But I think the more pressing issue is what we'll see in regards to the Red Bull seats, who's going to be sitting in them. Because I think people are shifting quite a lot of blame on the second driver issue on Horner. Ultimately, he was the person who chose to promote Liam Lawson and then chose to demote Liam Lawson and replace him with Tsunoda. And we haven't seen any significant or substantial difference in terms of performance between the two. I think particularly recently, Yuki has really struggled. He's looked a little bit like a fish out of water. And I think that's been put on Christian Horner's head. Now, combine that with the Verstappen discussion, I want to hear from you, Thomas. Do you think this is the type of move that will try and that's been done to try and appease the Verstappen camp? Do you think this is something that could entice him to stay in the midst of the rumours?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I'm not sure if it's going to work or not, because I think, you can change the team principle. What you can't change is the car, which is the primary issue at the moment. I mean, we look at the British Grand Prix. Verstappen had, he had to resort to a very, low downforce setup, and the weather kind of ruined him in that regard. But that's the thing, he needs, a car that kind of has low downforce because of just the sheer amount of understeer he gets. I mean, you look at some clips of him on Friday practice, like it's horrible. It's horrible understeer. So, I just think that like the idea of going to Mercedes may appeal to Max more than just staying in a team which he's already won a championship with.
Ultimately, look, I think the question is, poses to Lucy: is this enough to appease Verstappen? What's your perspective? Do you think he will be inclined to stay now?
Yeah, I mean, some of the discussions I saw were, has Horner been fired kind of as part of kind of an attempt to prevent Verstappen from going to Merck, because it probably would be Merck, or has kind of Horner been fired because he let Verstappen go to Merck? I think that, to be honest, the replacement team principle is Mekies, who I think who's done a good job with RB and is therefore kind of pretty embedded within sort of the Red Bull Racing brand as is. He's had a lot of experience. He was also some sort of team director, I can't remember off the top of my head, at Ferrari as well for quite a while. So he does have experience in a fairly top team. I think it could be enough if there's seen to be like a tangible kind of calming down of infighting with a new team principal and maybe some sort of promises of a positive trajectory in the future. It could be enough to even, maybe make Verstappen say, oh, I'll stay for at least the first year of 2026 and see how you can do these new regulations. But effectively, in a way, kind of because the rumours around Verstappen wanting to leave, I mean, it's so unconfirmed how far along that is, what's actually happening with that. We don't really know what he would need from Red Bull to persuade him to stay. So clearly Red Bull think this might work, otherwise they wouldn't have done it. But I can't say with any confidence whether it's going to have worked.
James, just looking at this as a broader thing in terms of Red Bull, what does this mean if this isn't enough? What does this mean for Red Bull if sacking Horner isn't enough to appease the likes of Jos Verstappen, who then proceeds to go and, so let's say in this hypothetical world, move to Mercedes? What's their options then? Because they've now they would have lost their star driver, a team principal that, yes, marred in a little bit of controversy, but absolutely has experience and tenure in the sport. What would this mean for Red Bull if it doesn't work?
Well, I don't think it will be good for them if it doesn't work. We've obviously got the uncertainty of how the engine's going to be next year, effectively building their own engine for the first time. It's not easy to build a Formula One engine. We don't know how that's going to turn out. I mean, if they lose Verstappen, they'll be in serious trouble. Because, I mean, if they had Lawson and Tsunoda in the car, they'd almost certainly be last in the Constructors' Championship right now. So ultimately, they're going to need to, they're going to need to sort some things out. But yeah, they are a big team. They've still got a big company behind them. If things can stabilise a bit, then they might attract people in the future. Part of that will depend how things go next year in the new rules, but future's a bit up in the air.
Up in the air is one way of describing this. From my perspective, this feels like a little bit of a Hail Mary from Red Bull. I don't know if they have the confidence that they're going to be able to produce a car that is going to be as dominant as it was, when, let's say, back when 2011, or maybe even more recently, let's say in 2022, 2023, do we think, I think they've got doubt in terms of their ability to produce that type of car again. Would you say, Thomas, this is like a last ditch attempt, or do you think there is a little bit more they can do? Or is there any? Yeah, how much more do you think Red Bull can do?
I think it's I don't really think there's much else. I think that's, other than promising to try and fix the car, and putting their full focus into that, I don't really see anything else. But again, we'll wait and see. I mean, I just think kind of, if I was in Max's position, I just hear Mercedes having a nice power unit for the next regulations. I'm hearing about them having a pretty good powertrain. Ford is a bit of an unknown quantity. Red Bull is in a bit of a mess at the moment. You go to Mercedes, it's kind of the nice, it's a race-winning team, and it's stable. With Red Bull, who knows? Maybe next year there might even be a midfield team. We never know.
It ultimately is very hard to predict, right? The impact of this type of move is something that we're going to see not in a week's time or a 2-week period. It's going to be over the next 6 months where we can really measure what Red Bull was prior and what Red Bull is then in the future. The last thing I want to touch on just before we finish this episode off is, does anyone here think this impacts our expectations of Red Bull going forward? Do we think this is the type of move that reduces our belief or hope in them? Starting with you, Lucy, is this that type of move?
Oh, I mean, I don't know whether this move exactly does it, but it's really just a symptom of the fact that Red Bull have kind of, for the past about a year now, it feels like they've kind of got by being still a kind of top team because of the fact that they have a really good driver, and also because of the fact that they had such a dominant car in 2023. It didn't really matter that they couldn't really build a great car going beyond that, because they could just keep adapting that one. I do not have a lot of hope for them in 2026. Completely new regulations. It's already been mentioned having engines and like having to build their own engines for the first time. All of their engineers have left effectively, or at least a lot of them. If Verstappen does go to Mercedes, wouldn't be surprised if we saw a few people following him there, or really wherever he went. And so Red Bull, I think, would have to pull out the turnaround of a century to be in a position where you could say, oh, Red Bull are going to challenge for the championship next year, and I wouldn't at least internally laugh at that idea.
James, do you think this is as desperate, as like kind of dire as Lucy suggests here? Do we think this truly does impact what we should expect from Red Bull going forward?
I'm not sure. They're clearly not in a great place at the moment. The team does seem to be falling apart. They lost a lot of key people. On the other hand, they are still a big company with a lot of money behind them. So I'm going to rule them out for the future. It will depend how the engine project goes in the future. But I wouldn't rule them out completely. They've still got 2 teams as well. Are they going to keep on with that in the future if they start declining? Is it worth them having 2 teams or not? But
yeah, I mean,
your senior team's not a front-running team.
It is a move that is producing more questions. Would you say, I guess, yeah, this is my final question, is to Thomas here. Do we think this is a move that produces more questions than answers?
I'm not sure. I think it kind of... I think it is very clear that kind of, sacking Horner at this stage of the season is kind of a bit desperate to me. I guess the question is how well the new team principal does. Obviously he seems to be well embedded in the team. So he might bring some much needed stability. Or it might just be kind of the end of it all, I guess. The end of kind of this dominant team. I mean, Nui, and now Horner have kind of gone, and it's only really Max who's left in the team, and there's a big question about whether or not he'll stay for next season. I think kind of, Red Bull have always been cutthroat. They'll always kind of make impulsive kind of changes, and that has kind of been what Horner himself did. So, it's kind of ironic to see, he someone mentioned, he was doing so many mid-season swaps that he got mid-season swapped himself. So I think it's just kind of ultimately, it's kind of Horner dying by his own sword in a way.
Yeah, I think you've summed that up pretty well. He's ultimately done everything he can to try and change this and that in terms of drivers and everything. Nothing seems to have worked. So yeah, now he's subjected to the same treatment, I guess. So we'll see how that
feels kind of poetic, sort of. If you if you think about it, it feels like it sort of fits. Yeah. He's been fully De Vries, who also got fired after a British Grand Prix, like this time 2 years ago.
So what you're saying, Lucy, is we got to put a bet on right now that someone important is going to be sacked after the next British Grand Prix in 2026.
I'm actually saying that Nick De Vries should be the next Red Bull team principal, but sure, we can go with that one.
You see, I don't think that's very likely, but we'll ultimately see. And that is kind of the perfect end to a poem that has lasted over 20 years with him. His cutthroat nature is something that has defined that Red Bull team and probably brought that Red Bull team the success it has got. So it's a sad way to see it end, but it's probably the way, is like looking at the story, it should have ended. So we'll see how that impacts Red Bull going forward. It's something that we can't really determine right now. The true impact of it is going to be something that we will address later down the line. But that's all the speculation that we can really do for the Horner removal. I want to thank my guests, Lucy, James, and Thomas, once again, for joining me for this episode. This was the 28th episode. I was your host, Anwar, for this one. And thank you guys very much for listening out, watching from your seats at home. And we will see you for our next episode, which should be sometime in the near future. So until then, goodbye.